Welcome to our weekly Mussar gathering. This week we will be starting on the soul trait of honor. We had a week off because I had a doctor's appointment last week, which went just fine. So here we are, and we will get started as we always do with a short meditation. So please relax in your seat and close your eyes. And take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And if thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them pass. Like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. All you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema. Listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema. Listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Hey, Joanne, welcome. Glad to see you. I was just getting a little worried about you because you're always here, so I'm glad you've made it. We are just getting ready to dive into the soul trait of honor. So to get started, I have one of my favorite quotes from Ben Zoma and Pirkei Avot. Who is wise? One who learns from every person. So we've looked at this one before, I suspect. So I'm curious, what is your reaction to this? Does this bring up any particular memories or a time you had an unusual teacher or maybe an unusual student? Yes, Paul.
The one thing that occurs to me is that I really try to make sure that if somebody is really irritating me, that I give myself time to think about, all right, so what am I being taught, basically? Like, why am I being irritated? What is this going on? But what can I learn from this? What is this person? Now, that's not always going to be the case where if somebody's irritating me, maybe they're just irritating. But sometimes, well, oftentimes, it's because there's something that is happening inside me that really needs to be looked at. So I need to do a gut check on whether it's something I need to look at or not. But in any case.
Yeah, that's I love that practice, or I love that thought. Yeah, because if we're being reactive, why is that? Sometimes people can be just kind of a schmuck on their own and we don't need to react to it at all. But if we are, maybe we're the schmuck, or maybe we're just being, well, that's a little self-judgmental, but maybe we're just have some lesson that we need to learn. Yeah, Sarah.
Sometimes what I've found is the people that are most annoying to me, they're most like me.
Hmm.
So when that happens, it's kind of, I try to look at it that way, like if my buttons are getting pushed, if I can take the time to pause and not react. Sometimes it's related to that. Like if somebody's very bossy,
Mhm.
I'm not bossy, or opinionated, or whatever. And I'm learning more because I'm working in a couple of different volunteer positions now,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to learn how to play in the playpen peacefully with others.
Mhm.
And something that I've been working on is that interpersonal effectiveness.
Mhm.
And sometimes my very direct approach, people do not appreciate, especially in California. I mean, and for me, I'm from New York. It's just sort of the way I roll. But I've realized that it can be offensive to some people. And now I've always said, oh, this is the way I roll. But now I'm beginning to look at it, because if it's not getting me, if I'm not being effective with people, then it's affecting me. So it doesn't really matter anymore how I used to roll. Now I have to maybe roll different.
Thank you, Sarah. Nancy, you were leaning forward. I couldn't tell if you were going to say something or you're just leaning forward.
I'm just leaning forward, but I think that I remember, and I don't know what the quote is, if there's a quote, but what Sarah said is that when we get mad at or when we get mad at somebody, we are always facing the mirror, or our mirror is everybody else.
Hmm.
Do you know? I mean, I've heard that from so many times, that whenever we face somebody, we're basically facing ourselves, and it's really interesting. But I was also thinking that with this quote that you said, lessons can be learned from anybody and everybody, and it's just how we perceive that.
Yeah.
And one person I really learned from so much, if I'm open to it, because I believe we have to be open, is my son. He
Hmm.
is so smart beyond his years that when I really open myself up, as judgmental as he is, I learn a lot from him, but I learn from everybody who's in my life, and I appreciate that. So
Thank you, Nancy. Karen.
So I think this follows this line of talking, which is that the wisest people tend to be those we think of as most learned. And how do you get there? By being open to learning. And how do we learn? By listening. So maybe the wisest are those who listen most often, most carefully, use active listening. And then when I think about the profession of psychology in particular, those people spend a lot of time listening, probably more time listening than talking. And oftentimes when they listen, the person who's there for help is actually the person who finds their own answer, just being able to talk. So I just thought it was an interesting cycle that I'd never thought about before tonight's conversation. Timothy.
Thank you, Karen. I love those connections that you were making. This line of questioning is sort of raising, this line of discussion is raising a question for me. If I hear something or someone hears something and they get reactive, who is responsible for that? If I'm reactive, who's responsible? Is it the person that did something that I'm reacting to, or is it me? Yeah, Joanne.
Well, I think it's a combination because, I mean, I was listening to what other people were saying. I mean, my son knows how to push my buttons, and I used to, always respond in a very bad way. And then there's another person who, I expect to be critical and to push my buttons. And last week I had an incident where I kind of jumped down her throat with something, but she also is very withholding and well, anyway. So it's a two-way street, like she'll push my button, then I might react, or I might react in anticipation of that. And then, so I'm trying to not do that. And, because, sometimes she's very nice, but I think there's also, a kind of competitiveness and, I don't know what. I don't feel like I get a lot of props from her. And a few weeks ago at the, I'll say this quickly at the, because this is the thing, okay, I'm the president of Sisterhood and I don't get no respect. Well, I do get respect from some people. But the last time, or a few months ago, I don't know, it was a very discombobulated meeting, and I felt like I was being attacked, and I don't know, I took a break for some reason. And apparently one of the women there who started coming told me that, like, look what Joanne's going through and look at what she's doing. And, why are you like lashing out at her and not appreciating? So I'm getting a little better reaction from people. And I just have to do my part and not anticipate something not good, And if it comes, it comes, but it can't help that.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, it can be very complicated, these sorts of interactions, and people can push our buttons, and it's understandable that we react. And if someone is in the habit of pushing our buttons, it's understandable that we might get a little, oh, is it going to happen tonight? And then we kind of get our hackles are up, and we become even more susceptible to reactivity. But I do wonder, from the Mussar perspective, or we're on our own journey, where the primary responsibility lies, maybe to our reactivity, or how we then act if we get reactive. Karen, what are your thoughts?
I think that there's a big difference between responsibility and understanding, and mercy. And for me, it was easy. I believe that we're absolutely responsible for our actions and our reactions. But as in, the Pavlov experiences, we do get our buttons pushed. There's trauma. There are things that may cause us to react in ways that we wish that we didn't. It could be physiological, biological, some other reason. Ultimately, we are the ones in control and the ones who are responsible, unless I think we can prove that, like, there's a medical issue where we're not in control of our faculties, or there's a dementia where we're really not in control there. But I think another very important piece follows, and that's why did we do that? And is there, does understanding in some way maybe mitigate how we handle the outcome? But for the most part, I think that as long as we are cognizant, we are responsible. God takes into account that our actions are judged with mercy, yes? And so I try to look at it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Karen, because we don't want this to become fodder for self-blame or self-shame, or, oh, I should have done better. And Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about trauma. I took a whole class on spiritual care and trauma this semester, and it's when we have those kind of things in our past, we can't always help the reactivity in the moment, but ultimately we have opportunities to learn and to grow and to get therapy and to get treatment and to be kind to ourselves when it happens. So it's not and I just love the way you brought mercy in on several occasions during your talk, because that really is the key, both for ourselves and for others. And I think that's a good segue into starting to talk a little bit more about honor. Okay, so may I have a volunteer to unmute and read these the first two bullets.
Yes. Honor is the ability to recognize the humanity in other people, feel empathy, and treat them with respect, dignity, and even with reverence. Second bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Both humility and honor concern how we relate to other people. Humility focuses on knowing our proper place in the world. Honor focuses on the converse, giving others their due.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and I will copy these into the chat. So what is honor then? What is this soul trait all about?
Norman?
Hey, Ron, welcome. Kobe, you look like you're percolating a little bit. Is there anything you'd like to share with us?
I think that honor to me is, it's more than just recognizing the humanity of another person. It's respecting every person's contribution, even though you may not. When I go to court, there's a lot of homeless people down in the courthouse area, and we're not very, none of the lawyers seems to be very concerned about this, or they kind of walk around them. And one day, one of these gentlemen grabbed the bottom of my coat, which it was alarming to me. I was a new lawyer. That was a long time ago. But I stopped for some reason, and he started talking to me, and he was, like many of the homeless in this area, was a military gentleman who had suffered some mental health problems while he was serving in Iraq. And he was pointing out where he used to live downtown. And pretty soon I find myself I sat down and had a lovely chat with this person, but it wasn't somebody, and I'm ashamed to say I would never have had a conversation with this person had that incident not happened. And I hope that I learned something, although I don't know that I did. But that's honor to me, is to stop and talk to these people and find out what their story is, where they came from, and how maybe you could help them. I don't know.
Thank you, Toby. That's a wonderful example. Aaron.
That was a great example. And I wish I had one to match, but it makes me think, and we've had this discussion previously about honor and the divine spark, meaning that every human has one. Sometimes they're more occluded than others. But if we view other people when we come into contact with them as honoring them. It's not elevating them because we know that they've done something wonderful, or maybe there's some other reason, capacity work. It's just the fact that they're humans and that we all are multifaceted. And so there's likely some good somewhere.
Mm,
And so whether it's just a hello, it's a smile, it's a yashar koach, it's just being able to look at another human and recognize that there's something special in that person, even if we don't know that person. And to start out that way, at least for me, sort of puts the other person in a positive light. It lets me start to greet someone as if I don't know anything about them, or I certainly don't know anything negative. The only thing I know is that they were imbued with the divine spark as I was, and to go from there. But I thought that the story that was just shared was fabulous.
Thank you, Karen. I love that, you know, just, it's not about like they've done something amazing. It's just the default is they're human. And therefore, when they look at them, you know, from a place of goodness. Paul.
Yeah, along along the same lines, I think. When I talked earlier about, you know, feeling irritated with somebody, if I sit back and I just think about or consider that, you know, sort of one of the phrases you bring up a lot, Greg, is that, you know, our divine spark is occluded by other stuff that, you know, is within us. And it's the same with other people, that if somebody is expressing themselves in a way that doesn't really fit with what I would, you know, that I understand, then if I just consider that there is the divine, because, you know, I do sense that, just that it's coming through in a garbled way, in a way that they feel really passionate about, but doesn't really land for me in a way that makes sense. But it's not up to me to make it, you know, I just have to think that, well, I'm just going to assume that there's something there and respond to that, as opposed to respond to the thing that my upbringing would consider me, you know, I would consider that person out to get me, you know, basically. My father's message, everybody's out to get you. So
Right.
thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to share in the chats the third bullet point rather than pull the share up again. And maybe someone can unmute and read this quote from Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg.
Honor. Oh, now I can't see it. It went away. Oh, no. Yeah, let's see if I can find it. I can't access it. I don't know. Let me see.
Anybody else want to?
Honor, I got it. Honor kavod is a palpable sense of presence. It is receiving everyone, including ourselves, with an ayin tovah, the good eye, alive with divine ultimate goodness. We are getting out of the way of the relentless critic and judge. Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg, IJS Tikkun Midot Curriculum.
Thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome.
We were, you know, a year and a half ago, we went through a cycle from the IGS Tikkun Midot curriculum written by Rabbi David Jaffe. And I thought this one really spoke to me. And it's when Karen was speaking earlier, I was, I was like, wow, that's very much in line with something we're going to look at. So what do people think? What is Rabbi Peltz-Weinberg's kind of main point? And do you relate to that? Or do you disagree? What does she mean by the relentless critic and judge?
I'm sorry. I think she means our inner critic and judge.
Hmm.
You know, that we judge ourselves and other people and
Mhm.
are critical of ourselves and others.
Yeah. And does that seem like an apt word, relentless?
Yeah.
Yeah, big thumbs up from Paul. Karen.
So often it's easy to judge others very quickly on their looks, on their action, on maybe where we're meeting them, how we've read about them. And I think that's the point about relentless, is that there are so many easy ways to judge a book before you get to take a look inside. And so that's how I related to that comment.
Thank you, Karen. That reminds me of a story, which I think I shared in the book, where it was one of the first times I was practicing honor, supposed to judge others favorably. And I was stopped at a red light, and this woman, pulled up in this car next to me, and she had kind of a cigarette sort of hanging out of her mouth. And the first
Mhm.
thought that popped into my head was white trash. And then, and then I'm like, okay, that's pretty judgmental. So I started looking more closely, and I noticed how clean the car was, how it was really immaculate, and just what I could see. And so I sort of consciously worked on changing my perception. It's like, wow, here's someone who really takes care of her car. Here's someone who, and that was, could I stop the judgmental thought? No. But I was able to reframe it and to not give that energy and to consciously approach it in a different way and to look for something good about this person. And I calmed down. It was really interesting. I just remember like when I said, oh, when I let go of the judgment, I remember just my whole body calming. It really felt better. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, so I think what's really, there's one person at work who brings this up a lot for me. And so the the relentless critic, there's the part of me that, what I've learned in the last couple of years reading is that, neurology and neuroscience finds that, when we've had a bad experience, we will learn to look for signs of that bad experience going forward, especially if it's traumatic in some way. So I know that's what happens for me. So I'm sort of on the lookout for it. And so when somebody is saying something very irritating, there is, the discernment of finding out, okay, so is what he's saying really irritating to me because it is irritating? And if so, if it's because he sounds like a pompous ass, does that still mean that what he's saying is not of value, or that where he's coming from is not of value, even if he is finding and he's young and he's just very, has a certain way of expressing himself that he's just not very conscious about how he sounds at this point. And it's not up to me to school him to say, you know, you sound like a pompous ass when you say that. No, that wouldn't really be.
Mm. Yeah, that may not go over very well.
But there is a discernment, right? That is both
Mm.
not, it's not devaluing, it's not dishonoring my own discernment and saying, oh, Paul, you should never think that way. It's more like, okay, so maybe that's there, and what else is there? You know, sort of look at both sides of it if I can. So, yeah, thanks.
What else is there? Great question.
Mm.
Let's take a look at the spectrum of honor. Where is it? Here we go.
Mm.
Okay, so for mantra, you know, we have see to the heart and not to the skin.
Mhm.
Which I think scans very well to the song. These are a few of my favorite things. See to the heart and not to the skin. But we notice that if we have sort of too much honor, then we might be prone to flattery. And flattery is something we talked about a lot. It was either the last time we met or the time before when we were talking about truth. And one of the things that we came up with was, you know, that flattery may be emphasizing things that aren't necessarily true, or there may be a air of manipulation about it, or there may be, you know, this sort of obsequiousness, you know, that we may not be sort of true to ourselves or true to kind of who the other person is, and we're actually not doing anyone any favors if we're kind of puffing them up with things that they don't possess. And with too little honor, you know, we get rudeness. You know, we get the you know, Paul's fantasy of telling the person that he's a pompous ass, you know, which is okay to think in the head, but is probably not a good idea to speak out loud, which is sort of how he parsed it. So thoughts about kind of the spectrum. Let's see, Ron and then Toby.
You know, the topic of honor is something, that little chart that you put up a minute ago, too little rudeness. Anybody who reads the newspaper or watches the news can see that's where our country is right now these days. You know, you can't find a Democrat who's going to say anything nice about a Republican, and you certainly can't find a Republican who's going to say anything even mediocre towards a Democrat. It's very hostile, and neither one of these people show any honor to the other side, and it dripples down to the people that are around you.
Mm-hmm.
I can only say this: I lived in my neighborhood now for 10 years, and a couple of weeks ago, this gentleman who puts Trump signs up on his house saw me walking. I walk with a cane, by the way, and he's about 20 years younger than me. I said hello, and what followed was a 20-minute horrible torrent at me because I don't have Trump stuff up at my house and how I'm part of the problem that's bringing the country down. Now, I didn't answer him. I just kept walking because that was the only thing I could do to make this thing stop. So we're in a very, you look for honor. This group here understands introspection, but you go out to the real world and it's not so much of a thing that people practice. So when they're rude, there's no impact on them. An hour later, they're not saying to themselves, geez, I went a little overboard. That doesn't happen. So, you know, our environment is certainly ripe for the idea of honor.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And I think of it as a spiritual sickness that our country has, you know, and we're, you know, our primary focus here is our own journey, but boy, it sure doesn't make it any easier when we live in an environment which is so hostile and confrontational. And I like to think there's a lot more people than we recognize because it never makes the news, when the person is sort of nice to someone else, or if someone is kind. And also our brains are wired to recognize threat more than they are. So these are challenging times. There's no question about it. Toby.
In the little chart that you put up, it seemed to me that there is a status imbalance, because you wouldn't flatter someone that you felt was beneath you, and you wouldn't probably be rude to someone you felt was of a higher status. And I'm wondering if anybody else thought that there was that class or status imbalance, and if I don't know how to fix that. I think the problem of the rudeness is, are we just noticing it more, or is there actually more of it? It seems to me like there's actually more of it.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about that. It's a really interesting observation, Toby, but I saw Sarah's hand.
So I don't, I understand what you said, but I don't necessarily, sometimes I suck up to people that I think are stupider than me, just being blunt, because of the position they're in. And, when I'm, I mean, it's, rudeness and flattery, I mean, those are, two extremes of the continuum. But I mean, again, working with people, sometimes I find that if I want to get what I want, sometimes I have to sort of suck up to people that are going to help me. Like, for example, I'm living in a condominium, a townhouse in a community with an HOA, and it's kind of new for me because I'm used to, if something is broken, I'll fix it. If I want something landscaped, I'll landscape it. If something looks ugly, I'll change it. But now, like in the spirit of cooperation, I'm having to try to be aware of the culture in this community. And, I guess, more just stay in the middle and not be too rude and not necessarily suck up to people, but to, sort of like treat others the way I want to be treated. And, it's, we've talked about it in other soul traits, or maybe this one, I'm no better than the homeless person. I mean, I had a lot more privilege, and it was just the family I was born into. And I see that, I mean, I was born into a, white middle-class family, and I've had a lot of privilege, and, in the past few years, my circumstances have changed a lot, and it's really different, I mean, for example, I used to have as much money as I needed. I used to have financial security, and now I'm divorced because I had no choice because of circumstances. And I'm finding like I'm really having to I'm like watching all the checks go out for all of these payments, and I mean, I'm doing fine and I'm going to be okay. But I mean, I remember like when I worked in a psych facility with students, and I would read a patient's chart, and their background was so hideous. And, I would say to myself, if I grew up in that environment, I'd be crazy too. I mean, and I saw like behavior, I mean, there's just all kinds of dysfunctional behavior that occurs because of some of our systems that we have in place. Like in that setting, you know, a patient would assault a staff member because they wanted to go to jail, because in jail they had a private cell, as
Hmm.
opposed to
Hmm.
at Valley Medical Center. I mean, so I've seen some crazy stuff, you know, but again, when I read people's history or take a walk in somebody else's shoes,
Hmm.
I realize, you know, there, but for the grace of God go I, or whatever that saying is, you know, I mean, just
Mhm.
count your blessings. So
Thank you,
that's just my
Sarah.
opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to pull back up the spectrum, but also Hillel and Pirkei Avot said, do not judge your fellow human until you've been in their position. So that's exactly, you know,
Mhm.
the point that Sarah made, and it's a really strong one. But I think this discussion that we're having about, you know, Toby's observation that, well, you know, there could be power dynamics that influence sort of how we attract others. But what this diagram is a metaphor for our own internal balance.
Mhm.
And where we're aiming to be is kind of in this middle zone. And if we're out of balance, then we can see behaviors from both ends of the spectrum. It's not always the case, but often if we tend to do this, we're going to do this as well. And so I could imagine a person who really sucks up to the boss and really treats their underlings like crap because they're out of balance. And
Mhm.
coming into balance would treat people. I mean, frankly, flattery is very disrespectful.
Mhm.
You're not giving that person enough credit for being able to take the truth or the real feedback, you know, and you feel like they need to hear certain things now, you know, or it doesn't, you know, if we always tell our kids that they're doing great no matter what, they actually become suspicious. What, I never make a mistake, you know, and I tried to say to my kids, okay, well, I'm giving you praise here, and you know, I don't give you praise just for anything, and I'll give you other, you know, measure feedback at times. So I think it's a really interesting and important kind of discussion that we've been having. Does that make sense to people?
Mhm.
Great. Okay, well, let's get ready for our breakout groups. And I'd like someone to maybe unmute and read this bullet. First bullet, please. What does Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerondi? Well, I will read this one. As early as the 13th century, Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerondi declared that the path of spiritual growth starts with knowing one's own worth. He tells us to remember that we have glorious ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, etc. We should comprehend that we descend from great people and share in their inheritance. So with your partners, you know, using Rabbi Yonah's methodology, what is some aspect of your life or ancestry about which you feel positively and might boost your own sense of significance? Again, this is from Rabbi David Jaffe from the IJS Tikkun Midot curriculum. So I'm gonna copy this into the chat. I'm just going to copy the question, not the other section. And we'll open breakout rooms. Okay, the rooms are open. Hey everyone, welcome back. Usually we do a little bit of a readout now, but I think that honor is so important kind of relationally. We talked about so many, pretty much every story we talked about had something to do with someone else, whether it's the neighbor who's chasing us down the street to share their political views, or the person at work, or the homeless person. I'll share this in the chat. The actions, and maybe we can all be encouraged to kind of think about writing down the mantra and
Did that.
and
Honor
thinking about
actions.
like something that we'll do, one small thing we can do to practice honor a little more. And some ideas that could inspire you would be to look for the divine spark in every person you meet.
Mhm.
Look for the good, the Ein Tovah, the good eye, when you notice yourself judging others. Eliminate one shaming behavior. We didn't talk about shame, but that's really, not a good thing. And then maybe just sit down and think about people in your life and who could you treat with maybe more honor or less honor. And it might be a particular person, like someone at the shul or somebody at work. Or it might be like a class of people, like, well, homeless people, or rich people, or people of a different political party, people of my own political party, that I could treat with more or less honor. So I'll just take a couple minutes, maybe think about that, write down something that we could do. Yes, Ron.
You brought up the idea of seeing the divine in others. And I take part in a VOD. And a couple of weeks ago, we were in this VOD, and this same concept was brought up about seeing the divine in others. And it's a difficult concept to gather. And the suggestion was that if you can't see the divine in others, it's a thing, fake it till you make it. Find it. If you can't find it, pretend you're finding it. See a beam in somebody else. It all starts, everything with this is in increments. So the idea of looking at somebody and seeing the divine in them is a lot to ask. This might be done, if you're having difficulty doing this, it might be done easier in increments where you build up to it, where you think you see the divine in others. And finally, you will.
Thank you so much, Ron. That is such great Mussar practice. You described that so well. I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a big lift. And it's not about like suddenly embracing somebody who's really different, but you could take this big a step. If you could make one tiny step, then really that's the whole game. Because once you've made that first step, it becomes so much easier to make a second step. All right, well, let's all kind of relax and close our eyes and take in a deep breath through the nose. Take a nice leisurely exhale. Maybe we'll just try to call to mind someone who seems very balanced in honor. Someone who treats people with respect and dignity. And just allow ourselves to sit in the presence of their memory, whether they're still with us or not, but a memory of an interaction. Allow ourselves to settle into a place of just calm and acceptance. Accepting the people around us for who they are. Not trying to change them. Not trying to judge them. Knowing that we can accept them without approving of them, without endorsing them. What we need to do is accept their humanity. When you're ready, you may open your eyes.